It is a matter of truth telling and being honest with ourselves about what we are actually experiencing, and does that feed our well-being?
Welcome to the Coaching Revealed podcast series. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Matzelle. In today's episode, we are interviewing Dr. Pamela Larde, Director of Education of the Institute of Coaching. Outside of her role at the IOC, Dr. Larde is also a professor, author, and researcher whose work explores joy. I'm joined by fellow IOC podcast host, Emily Terrani, as we interview Dr. Larde on how joy impacts our daily lives and how individuals can cultivate healthy habits for sustaining their joy. Dr. Larde's work in joy started in academia when she found that both coaching tools and an understanding of joy were crucial in helping her respond to the various needs students were bringing to her. Working with populations including students, trauma survivors, and veterans, Dr. Larde began exploring how joy helps build resilience. One of Dr. Larde's models is the Multidimensional Framework of Joy, which contains the components of well-being, internalization, connection, and liberation. With well-being centered, individuals are able to internalize their perspectives on life and explore their connection with others. Through these components, the framework of joy can help liberate individuals and communities. This episode explores how individuals can assess their well-being, along with sustaining their joy through challenges such as fragmented communities and potentially toxic environments. Thank you for tuning into Coaching Revealed. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Coaching Revealed, where we will be focusing on positive psychology through the lens of joy with Dr. Pamela Larde. And I'm here with my co-host, Austin Matzelle. And we all know Dr. Pamela Larde as the Director of Education at the Institute of Coaching, but she is more widely and affectionately known as Dr. Pamela. She's a social scientist, a coach, and a business owner. She's currently the Associate Professor of Leadership at Anderson University and serves on the scientific board for the London-based Ezra Coaching. In 2013, she founded the Academy of Creative Coaching, which is an ICF-accredited coach training school that primarily serves leaders, change agents, and organizational teams. She's also written and published extensively and facilitated learning experiences for academic and corporate audiences globally. Her primary areas of focus are joy, resilience, well-being, post-traumatic growth, effective coaching, justice, equity, inclusion, determination, and agency, which is why we're so thrilled to have her talk with us today. So welcome, Austin, and welcome, Dr. Pamela.
Thank you, Emily. Good to see you both.
How are you doing today?
Doing well.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So excited to be on an episode with you as opposed to working with you, because it's been great to get to work with you for the last few years. And now we get to talk and have a conversation about your work with the IOC and more broadly your work in coaching, which is so fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. I love it.
So we'd love to just get started to find out how you got involved in coaching.
I was doing coaching sort of in an informal manner, working in student affairs. I've been at different universities like the Claremont Colleges, Marquette University, Mercer University. In my roles at all of those places, I have really been in a position to coach the students that I work with. I guess the culminating moment was when I transitioned from being a student affairs professional to a college professor. At that point, I am working with students in PhD programs, and they're stressed out, and I am the research professor. So they are paranoid and terrified of what the heck am I going to have to do in this research course. And I also served on dissertation committees. I was the chair for many dissertation committees. So I'm interacting with students in probably one of the most terrifying academic journeys of their lives. So I had more and more students share what's going on in their personal lives on a regular basis, as opposed to just focusing on the research. So when I'd meet with students, they're telling me about their spouses and their children and a parent that they lost, or just real life things that are happening. And so it became apparent to me that what blocks academic success is not always academic issues. It's often non-academic issues. How do I best position myself to serve these students well when they are experiencing non-academic issues and crises in their personal lives? So after having a student come to my office one day And I'm asking her, what's your research question? And she's like, I don't know. I haven't been able to think about it because I spent the night rocking a bottle of gin while my kids are running around naked and I don't know where my husband is. And I'm like, whoa, okay. And I was just kind of, what do I do with this? So I ended up going to, after we talked, I did my due diligence. I pushed the tissue box to her. I let her talk about it. We went through it. And then after she left, I went to our dean and said, look, I need coach training because I want to be able to serve my students well. And that's really where it all began for me.
That's awesome and interesting that you already knew what coaching was. I would imagine that a lot of professors and teachers and people in the academic space are not necessarily aware of coaching, and that you had that insight to know that that's the skill that would be most beneficial.
Well, I think it was one of those meant to be kind of moments because I don't know when exactly I became aware of what coaching was, but I know that I got something in my inbox not too long before that moment that said something about get coach training. I was like, what the heck is this? And so I think the seed was planted right on time.
How did you find that having those coaching skills helped you in the future moments like what you just described?
It allowed me to think more from the standpoint of not having to have the answers and be the expert, but to ask them questions and to really allow them to dig into themselves. And I realized that the more they spoke, the more they were able to identify solutions for themselves. That was a huge burden off of me. I always felt like if somebody is coming to me telling me they spent the night rocking a bottle of gin when their kids are running around naked, I'm supposed to come up with an answer for them. And so having the coach training allowed me to realize, no, I'm not here to come up with the answers, but I am here to hear you and to give you a space to emote or whatever it is that you need to communicate. This is the space to do that because a lot of people don't have those spaces. What an honor it is to be able to be a person to hold that space and not have to have the answers.
And I think something that's really, really interesting is you're talking about coming and do conversations with students, and they're discussing how life is coming at them so quickly and so fast, and it's something that can just add to the stress because all these things are happening and you don't know necessarily what the right answer is or the next move is. I'm making an assumption here, a little bit of a jump here, but that joy kind of seems to be one of the potential answers that works, that it's still a broad concept, but it's a way to have a mindset about what's happening around you. For you, how did joy emerge as an interest, as something that you want to research and that you want to do work in?
Yeah, it's interesting because it was the collection of those experiences with doctoral students. My research around how people who are first in their families go to college made it happen, how people who struggled with trauma in their homes or in their communities persisted to go to college, how veterans returned from combat and reintegrated into society and the struggles for them and their families to readjust to the new life, and how people overcame divorce. So between my experiences with students and then those different research studies, I became very clear about what the barriers were. I became very clear about what people struggled with. I was often asked, what are the commonalities between all of these different experiences and these populations of people? The commonality, if we take it back to that student who came in my office after rocking a bottle of gin to the person who was experiencing transitioning back to civilian life after war, they are looking at how to find their joy. They were looking at how to find fulfillment in their lives. And it looks very different for everyone. So allowing people to find their joy in accordance to their values and what works for them and their well-being, which is so key to joy. So when I look at the intersection of coaching and joy, it's so important for us to be able to define what joy is for us, and for us as coaches to help people define what joy is for them. And especially, again, I have to emphasize well-being and to move people into that direction.
For anyone listening, kind of what is a way for them to differentiate between these concepts of joy and well-being and happiness? Do you view those as being kind of similar? Are there specific markers that we could use to see, oh, this is joy versus this is happiness?
One of the most common, I guess, easiest ways that I distinguish joy from happiness. Happiness it involves any kind of change or responses to things that are happening on the outside of us. It still contributes to our well-being, because happiness, it's a collection of positive experiences that help to elevate us. So it's important. Joy, on the other hand, is our responses or our creation of experiences that are rooted inside of us. It could be that we are going through some really difficult times and what's going on the outside isn't great at all, but we're able to draw from the joy and the values that are connected to our joy internally in ways that enhances and nurtures our well-being. So the distinction in my mind is that happiness does not always have to be rooted in something that contributes to well-being. We could be happy about something that is damaging to us. And we see this happen all the time. We see this happen with addictions. And even on smaller scales, we see this happen with pursuits that really cause us harm. Joy, on the other hand, is rooted and tied to well-being, and it is associated with the values that we hold that contribute to our well-being. So there's the difference. I don't like to pit one against the other because they both have value. It's just a matter of understanding, what is it that I'm experiencing right now? Is this a temporary experience of happiness based on what's going on around me? Is this an internal wellspring of joy based on what's going on inside of me?
When you were talking, and that's so powerful, that's such an interesting distinction. What popped up in my mind was locus of control. Like how you just described joy.
Yes.
Enables and empowers someone that they can cultivate joy no matter what's going on in their world. And it doesn't sound like we necessarily have that with happiness. And then also the point of view tying it with well-being, it's empowering you can really enhance your own well-being, and you do have the control over it. We might not necessarily have much control over creating happiness, and the happiness might be fleeting and temporary, which is what my impression of what happiness is not something that's sustainable.
Right. It is something that when we have it, let's hold on to it and enjoy it in those moments. But let's also understand that it is dependent on what's going on, around us. Yeah, I love your reflection on that. The locus of control piece is huge. And this is a whole other conversation, but it does sort of go into a little bit of a model that I have around agency and the workplace, and how you determine where is your locus of control in this particular work setting, and what capacity do you have for change in that setting. So they are very intimately connected.
We would actually love to hear about some of your models and frameworks. Then you just perfectly set up that.
Sure.
Yeah, I would love to hear, I know you have a lot of them. So is there one in particular that you'd like us to focus on and talk about today?
Yeah, and it's funny because I am a very visual person. So in order to really fully explain any of the concepts that I'm talking about, I have to draw pictures, and I have to tie them to the concepts that I may have read in the literature. So like when we talk about positive psychology, Marty Seligman's work, in positive psychology, obviously is like the groundbreaking work in positive psychology. And his PERMA model really focuses in on those, positive emotions and engagement and relationships. And there's so many intersections between his work and what I've found in my research around joy. I've got to draw these things out to kind of look at, what have I found in my studies? What have I found in reading the literature? How do those things intersect? And then what's new? What is a new piece of that really isn't showing up in the literature? The embodiment of all of those questions show up in my multidimensional framework of joy. In the multidimensional framework of joy, there is essentially 4 dimensions that are the areas of focus in terms of what brings forth joy and how is joy nurtured. The core of the multidimensional framework of joy is well-being. And a lot of that has to do with the work of Seligman and what he talks about as it pertains to well-being. But it was so obvious and it was so evident in my own research that the participants are looking to maintain or to create well-being in their lives. That was the precursor to any experience of joy, was really seeking that out with intention and pursuing it. And so from well-being, according to the Multidimensional Framework of Joy, it determines how we pursue our communities and how we live out the communities that we're a part of. What are those relationships like? If we are entering into relationships with well-being that isn't great and that we aren't working on, those relationships suffer. And it can look a lot of different ways, but those relationships don't thrive. Our well-being also informs how we practice joy. And so that's the other piece. It is the practices of joy we engage in sort of in alignment with our community. So we have the community and we have the practices of joy. And as we practice joy, we get better at it. We nurture our well-being. We feed our well-being. But because our well-being informs the way that we practice joy, our joy practices can be really minimal. We can be afraid to engage in them. We can feel guilt. There's a lot of barriers to how people express joy. And so the extent to which our well-being is being nurtured, it helps us overcome those barriers so that we can practice joy. So we've got well-being, we've got community, and we've got joy practices. The combination of those, when rooted in a place of positive well-being, can lead to liberation. And this kind of liberation can permeate so many different areas of our lives, from communities that might be distressed. It could be political distress. It can be different forms of violence. So finding ways to liberate individuals and communities from things that keep us from our joy. It could be personal. It could be within relationship dynamics, whether that is family members, romantic relationships, friendships. How do we liberate ourselves from those situations that hinder us from our joy? And so liberation has its own meaning depending on who the person is and what they need to be liberated from. So just recapping, we have the well-being piece, which leads to our communities and our joy practices, which together lead to our liberation. I could have just said that part and just kept it simple.
No, I love the deep dive. It's so helpful. So many questions I have for you. I guess what would you say are the most effective ways to cultivate joy based on those different components?
I think making sure that you have a community that is in alignment with you around your commitment to joy. That's going to be really important because, gosh, so many people talked about how, especially men, I think their reasons were different from women. They talked about feeling guilt around experiencing joy. And I should qualify it because specifically it was Black men who were experiencing guilt around, who were expressing guilt around experiencing joy, because they were saying that they knew that there were other people in their circles, other Black men in their circles who weren't experiencing joy the way they were or the way that they really want to. That compelled them to just stifle their joy, just tone it down. I don't want to do too much because I don't want to be I don't want to be joyful in their faces while they're struggling. And I think that's commendable. And I think that it is important to keep in mind how your expressions of joy can impact other people. I mean, we could be really selfish and say, I don't care, I'm going to be joyful anyway. In some settings that might be okay and it might be appropriate, it might be fine, but I do think that having levels of empathy are important. So if you are surrounded by people who are struggling to express their joy and it's stifling your ability to present your own, you've got to find communities where you can engage in those joint joyful expressions. And that takes intention. That takes putting a message out to all your people saying, hey, I need some partners in this joy thing. Who's going to join me? It takes intention.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that reminds me too, one of my biggest takeaways from psychology is that since we're social beings, other humans are both the best and the worst thing for our health and well-being. And so you're speaking to that, right? Finding people that align to your values and the joy that you're seeking and the way you like to engage in joy really matters.
Right. Absolutely. Another model that I have, the communities of joy model, identifies the different types of communities that might exist in your world. And so this includes people who are as close to you as your core community, to people who are furthest away from you, who are your fragmented community. And by fragmented community, I mean the people who diminish your joy, who are actual threats to your joy, whether it is intentional or passive. They are the ones who you have to be aware of their presence so that you can understand how to maintain your joy despite their existence in your life. You can't always get rid of these people who are in your fragmented community. They could be family members. They could be somebody who lives with you. So how do you identify them, and how do you operate in a way that is going to allow you to maintain your joy and to protect yourself from what they may be able to take from you?
I think when it comes to the concepts of like those different levels of community and identifying how you're interacting with other people, and I really like the point on, it's not just like, oh, you and someone don't get along. They're impacting your joy negatively. And so because of that, you're able to just drop them. You're able to just have them packaged up into a nice little box and put them far away. Like
cancel people,
Yeah, I feel like life isn't necessarily that simple in terms of if you're having a challenge with a certain relationship, you can just be like, well, I'm going to protect my joy, so I'm never going to talk to you again. That doesn't seem necessarily just the way things are able to function. So I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that an individual can move through the different communities that they have, and maybe they are struggling with like a challenging relationship? What are some tools or some ways you've seen individuals get from having that like more focus on their fragmented community and being more involved with or acknowledging their core community, and not in a way that's toxic positivity, but in a way that's helping them sustain their joy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first check for whether or not you are engaging in false positivity is, am I lying to myself? Am I being honest with myself and about whatever it is? So let's just say this relationship. Am I being honest with myself about what I'm experiencing in this relationship? Being able to answer that question sometimes requires a coach, sometimes requires an outside voice to kind of help us process what's going on. And I think it's really important for us to be willing to, brave enough even, to process our relationships with other people and to help identify, who are the people that are genuinely bringing joy to my life and who's not. So let's say that the people who are not are people that you just can't immediately get rid of. Maybe it's a boss, or, it's somebody that you're working with and you've got, it's a part of your world. It's not easy just to quit the job and move on. So how do you navigate that? I have a colleague, and her name is Dawn Taylor, and she is a coach, and she lives in Canada. It's a big country. I can't remember exactly what part. She has this concept called a brag buddy, which I really love. And I talk about it a lot wherever I go, because I just think it's such a brilliant concept. You have somebody in your life who you can openly share your wins with. We often think of having somebody that we can mourn with, or somebody we can trust with our vulnerability around difficult feelings. But this is about having somebody we can trust with our vulnerability around really great feelings. And sometimes when we have those really great feelings, it makes other people feel adverse to you. Other people are like, what is she bragging about? Tone it down. And so being able to curate a community of people who can be that for you is really a buffer against the communities that diminish your joy. And they also can help you strategize around how to manage those kinds of relationships. And so it could be that, I can't tell you, and I know I'm not the only one here in this world who has people that you have to love from afar, because you know that if you bring them too close into your world, it's another experience possibly of getting hurt again. Loving from afar is one really good strategy if possible. And it doesn't even have to mean geographically afar. It could just mean emotionally afar. Like, I'm only going to invest so much into this situation. But there's so many different ways to first identify who the fragmented members of your community are, or the members of your fragmented community are, and then make decisions around how you will engage, your rules of engagement, with those particular people.
As you were talking a little bit, I remembered seeing this post on social media go around a couple of years ago from some researcher just on Twitter. She was talking about how there was a small joy that came out of COVID for her, wherein she and her husband now had this routine where they would sit on their porch and they would drink coffee in the morning and they would talk about life. And it was one of the things that she really liked. And being social media, she started getting all these comments like, oh, some people don't have a partner. Some people don't have a house with a porch. People don't like coffee. Like, how are you out here parading and bragging and, talking about all these things that you have? You should understand that people have it harder. I do see that type of sentiment where, you see someone who has a lot of good things lined up for them and they're talking about how they're joyful about it or they're grateful for it. And you can see like people commenting or kind of wanting to drag that down a little bit. I really like the way you alluded to that in terms of the fragmented community, and then really finding that conversational partner or close friend, that core community individual who you do go and share your victories with, and you can brag about something that you're grateful for with them. And so it's kind of cultivating that space of sometimes people aren't going to love what you do and it has nothing to do with you.
Right.
But then I guess it's the question of, well, how do you handle that if you share something that's so precious or good for you and you receive negative feedback from someone who doesn't really know you, but it still could impact you so negatively, so sharply.
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
I mean, it is why, again, the community is so important, and to be aware of when those moments are happening, because it hurts. Those kinds of things hurt. They take us aback. There's something about social media that it impacts our emotions in such intense ways that doesn't seem like it really shouldn't, because it's just writing on the other side of the screen. But no, it's real emotions that impact us. And so we have to protect our well-being in the same way when we're dealing with social media kinds of backlash as we are interpersonally, in real life. And I think that's where the coaching comes in terms of being able to identify where your pockets of joy are and how, what practices work for you. That kind of leads to the practices of joy, which looks at joy from 4 different standpoints. And for some people, it's not necessarily about jumping for joy or dancing. For me, I love dancing. For me, I guess joy is very kinesthetic, but it's not for everybody. For some people, it is meditation. It's savoring life in a way that I want to feel it in my body. So knowing what works for you is going to be really important so you can tap into that during some of the most difficult times.
And how do coaches help their clients do that?
Well, so if we were going to be really intentional about it and say, we're going to look at the 4 practices of joy, and I want you to identify how your personality and your values resonate with the 4 practices. And I'll say what they are. So it's the experience of joy, meaning how do I welcome or create opportunities to indulge in joy? The emotion of joy. So how do I physiologically respond to joyful moments? The ethos of joy, how my character and my values embody and reflect joy. And the expression of joy, how I outwardly demonstrate that I'm experiencing joy. When I think about some of the things that really bring me joy personally, I can point to, for example, the ethos, how my character and my values embody and reflect joy. So what are my values and what's my character and what are elements of that? And a coach can kind of walk somebody through that. What does that look like? What do you value? And I would land, because I've had time to think about this, but if we fast forward through that process, I would land on things like doing meal prep for the people in my life who I love. So service kinds of things are part of my value system. And I find great joy in doing things like that. I have another client who's discovered that it is about just something as simple as fixing her bed in the morning. And just having that as the beginning of her day has been something that's brought her joy. And so that's an experience that she's creating for herself. Coaches can kind of help their clients identify who are you and how do you align with one of these four or any or all of these four practices.
I love that. Do some people resist joy? How do you also help people, it's challenging for them to be more joyful than they might be naturally?
In my research leading up to writing the book, Joyfully Single, I had a couple of conversations. It's so interesting because the men were the ones who were struggling most with being single. So I had a couple of conversations with men who basically said, there's nothing joyful about this process. And I really resent the fact that people try to make people find joy in divorce or in breakup or in being single. There's nothing joyful about this. I hate dating. I hate the reason why I'm single. So there's definitely resistance. And there was a point in the research where I was asking people how they find their joy. And I started getting responses that were kind of like, I resent you for asking this question. Why are you,
Wow.
Why are you making me go there? And part of it was because I don't practice joy. And it really brought out, I would probably say, more resentment than guilt for not being able to answer the question in their minds. Like, I don't know, because that's not what I do. I don't do joy. It's not natural. I don't wake up in the morning and I'm joyful. That's just not who I am. So when I switched the question to how do you handle struggles? How do you overcome barriers or whatever it was? I can't remember exact phrasing, but how do you overcome hard times? Now, those questions people could identify with and could answer. What they didn't realize is that as they were talking about how they found their joy.
It's amazing how people are more receptive to just simple language changes.
Yes.
That also brings up Hae-Sun Moon's model on dialogical inquiry, where she has, these quadrants and the scales go from preferred to unpreferred and then from future to past. And some people, it sounds like, and I know I do this too, I have the innate desire to kind of think about, well, I don't want to talk about that preferred future. I don't want to talk about that good part, that good thing that's coming to me. I kind of would rather sit in the part that hurts. Like, it's easier, that you're kind of referencing how people talk about how it's easier to sit with a negative thing that's happened than to talk about a joyful thing that's happened. And I mentioned kind of relationships falling apart. And that kind of brings up this broader question for me that also involves relationships. Sometimes there's something that brings you joy. So it could be a habit as small as making your bed every morning, or it could be a relationship. And then if that thing, falls apart, or it no longer is providing you joy, where's room for letting go of something that used to bring you joy that now no longer sparks joy in you?
It's so interesting because I am watching somebody in real time on social media go through like heartbreak, and joy is the value. That's the value system that lives in you. The practices are what nurtures that value, what sort of allows you to practice what is already inside of you. As we're practicing these things, it's important for us to pay attention to the extent to which this is actually feeding our joy, or if we are really, again, this whole thing about being honest with ourselves and this toxic positivity, are we just doing things that are not rooted in truth and that are not rooted in our well-being? So in the case of this woman who, she's an expert on singleness, and she had this whole whirlwind marriage. And she finally kind of admitted after a few months, like, I know I've been silent about it because, he left. And so everybody's shocked, but she's going through this whole process of, but I know we have a history or a future together. I know we have a joint purpose together. And in my mind, I'm like, so this is somebody holding on to what I call in my book, the false story, that it's not playing out. Like if we look at the evidence and we look at the truth that's being presented to us, we're like, nope, I don't want to see that. There's another story. There's another story. I'm going to hold on to that story because that story is familiar to me and it brings me joy. And if that story doesn't exist, what else is there? And there's this fear of letting that go. And I've definitely seen that a lot. And so sometimes it always helps to have another point of view, a coach, somebody, a therapist, depending on what it is that the need is. It is a matter of truth telling and being honest with ourselves about what we are actually experiencing. And does that feed our well-being? Is this feeding our well-being, or are we taking the hits and diminishing our joy for the sake of a false story that we're telling ourselves? So it's not easy because we're told to have faith about a lot of things. So how do you pick apart what's faith versus what is me telling myself a false story? And there's no one universal answer for that, but it is something that you can process with the people in your life who can see, sometimes it's easier to see the circus when you're in the audience than when you're in the circus.
Sounds like joy is a really good indicator of what's really going on.
I think so. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why it helps you look at your baseline for joy. First, let's get there. Let me figure out what it feels like to experience it so that I have an understanding of what joy feels like. And then below the baseline, there's indicators that kind of show that, oh, shoot, I've kind of fallen below the baseline. And then there's indicators that show when you're above the baseline. An easy check for yourself is to know where your baseline is. Get yourself in a situation in a state where you have experienced joy and you're familiar with it. It's not weird to you, and understand what your baseline is. And then check with yourself. Am I below the baseline? How long have I been below the baseline? It's okay for us to fall below. We know that we're not going to always have wonderful days, but how long have I been here, and what's causing it? And is it the same thing that keeps causing it? And how do I stay aware of these kinds of repetitive experiences?
I'm just thinking about how we've touched on a little bit where life can be very chaotic, can be very challenging. And with a practice like joy, it's not something as simple as just, oh, I'm going to decide to be joyful. Because sometimes you can get stuck in your own mindset and where you're coming from, that those stories you're telling yourself. You have to sometimes derive the joy within yourself and your own self-practice and work. And then sometimes you need to reach out to your community, and there's so many factors. So I'm wondering, for either for you on a personal level or for what you've seen work with your clients, what have been some of those tools that people can use that can help them center on and check in on where their baseline is?
The specific tool it's in my book, and it's really a joy scale, an indicator of, how can I visually, because again, I'm a visual person. So how can I see where I am? So it's one thing that you can use with your coach, you can use with even peers, just to kind of say, hey, we're going to check in on each other on a regular basis. I also have an assessment, and it's called the Journey of You assessment. And it's just kind of a way to check in on 9 different areas of your life to get a sense of how you're doing. And it's like a well check for each of those areas of your life, like dating and relationships, or home security in general. So a lot of different ways to kind of check in on yourself to see, where you are in those areas. So those are a couple of tools. But I think also the extent to which you can get really good at being self-aware. I know that sometimes I have moments where I'm like, something isn't right in me right now. I don't know what it is. I'm just kind of this little weird vibe going on in me. And I have to take a moment and stop and check what's going on. What's triggering this right now? Being able to kind of to pay attention to that and to create experiences that help take care of that, but also kind of brings forth the joy. And here's why it's different than happiness. Because what happiness is I'm going to respond to the great things that are happening in my life. And, I might even create moments of happiness, but joy is something that you can create in the midst of chaos and pain. And that's where those practices of joy comes in. And so how do you pull from yourself the resources that you need to get through the pain or whatever weird feeling is going on? Sometimes I'll examine a weird feeling that I'm having, and it'll be connected to something that may have happened like 9 o'clock that morning that I just didn't realize I was still carrying. So just, self-awareness is so huge, and knowing how the more you know about yourself, the more you know how to sort of nurture that wound or whatever it is that's going on in you.
You segued perfectly into what I wanted to ask you as our wrap up, our final question before the wrap up. But since you mentioned that joy is a value system and it sounds like it's a way of life. So I'm sure people listening in want to know, okay, how can I really embody cultivating a joyful life, make it my way of life? So kind of a two-part question. So how can you do that? And then also, how does finding silver linings, even in the chaos, tie into that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to bring it back to what the study of positive psychology is all about. And, positive psychology looks at human flourishing and how we overcome barriers as opposed to how we are pummeled by barriers. And so there's a lot of value in both forms of psychology. And there's multiple forms of psychology, but there's a lot of value in the positive psychology as well as the traditional psychology, because traditional psychology helps us identify those wounds and find out what they do to us if they're not taken care of. The positive psychology also helps us identify those wounds, but also focuses on what we do to overcome those and to find our points of power and points of strength, within those situations. I think it's important for us to, as human beings, is to do positive psychology kind of work with ourselves and understand some of the key elements and positive the benefits of positive psychology. So when I think about things like everyday social media wisdom would tell you, move in silence, don't tell anybody about your wins. Where positive psychology researchers have found that's actually counter to your joy and your happiness and your well-being, and that you must share. Now, you don't have to share with everybody. You don't have to post on social media, but you've got to have outlets and, to be able to live out and share those moments of joy. And what, those barriers that hold us back from it, which includes shaming, feeling guilty, foreboding joy, which is something Brene Brown talks about. And it's this idea that we are so afraid that if we experience joy in its fullest, we're going to have a crash and burn at some point, because it doesn't just continue on and on and on. Sure, happiness is more fleeting than joy, but even when we have joy, we still have moments of pain. It doesn't make pain go away or make us numb to pain, but it does help us better respond to pain and be more proactive about the pain we live. So when we are talking about how do we embody lives of joy, we are talking about how we accept the full scope of what goes on in the human experience and allowing joy to be the thing that takes us through each one of those experiences, whether they are our highs or whether they are our lows. So what does that mean for me personally? And when I say allow joy to take me through those moments, for me, it's community. For me, it is saying it out loud, saying I'm struggling today, being able to say that. Not being able to say that for me would be like the beginning of my spiraling. So I know what I need. And I think it's going to be important for us to know what we need in order to thrive through the difficult times.
Yeah, it sounds like joy is such a powerful tool for the general natural tendency for humans to be negative. We have a negativity bias. So if you're seeking out joy, even when things are going totally and completely wrong, you're breaking that pattern and habit of focusing on the things that are going wrong. And instead, you're just shifting a little bit more towards the positive.
Yes, absolutely. That's so huge. Yeah.
That's incredible. I would love to give you the opportunity also. So I know with your work and your models, you have your workbook, Joyfully Single. But for anyone who's listened to today's conversation and they're wondering, well, how do I kind of work with my baseline, help live a life that's a little bit more joyful, not necessarily easier, but having some more joy in it, how can people follow up with you and see what you're working on, and learn how to be a little bit more joyful?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is by going to my website, and it's just drpamelalarde.com. Larde is Larde, but drpamelalarde.com. Everything's there. And it was through the blood, sweat, and tears and me finding my joy that this website even exists, because it took a lot. And so, I am very happy about it. And it shows, how to get involved and how to, in the Joy of You assessment is on there as well. So if you want to take that, you'll get your results via email, and you can kind of start from there.
So great to talk with you on a call like this and get to learn more about all the work that you do outside of the IOC and with the IOC. And it's just, I feel a little bit more joyful already just from having talked. So I want to thank you so much.
Yeah, this brought me joy for sure.
I love it. I love it. I hope that's the case for those who are listening.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you for the next episode of Coaching Revealed.
Thank you, Dr. Pamela.
Thank you, Dr. Pamela.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Terrani with Coaching Revealed.